No one gave a shit as the alien kid got the absolute crap beat out of him. Not a single solitary fuck was given, except by the lone human who decided to step up and do something about it. Walter King's steel-toed boots stomped down the sleek hallway of Galactic Academy, the sound echoing like gunshots. At 16, he was transferring mid-year to this prestigious school on the Academos Prime space station. The top education center in the known universe, they said. A place for the best and brightest young minds, they said. What they failed to mention in the glossy brochures was that humans were a rarity here, an oddity, a curiosity at best. At worst, a target. Walter's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene unfolding before him. A small tentacled boy, Raisin he would later learn, cowered against the wall as 3 hulking insectoid Zegrax students loomed over him. Their mandibles clicked with cruel laughter as they shoved the little alien, sending his datapads clattering to the floor. "Squishy, useless tac-tac," the largest Zegrax sneered, his compound eyes glittering with malice. "You don't belong here." Walter's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles turning white. He scanned the crowd of onlookers, a mix of various alien species, all studiously avoiding eye contact. No one made a move to intervene. Fury ignited in Walter's chest, a raging inferno that threatened to consume him. This ends now, he vowed silently. He would not, could not, stand by and watch this injustice unfold. For if he did nothing, if he allowed this cruelty to continue unchecked, then what hope was there for any of them? In a universe so vast and unforgiving, they had to stand together. United. Strong. Human. With a deep breath, Walter stepped forward, ready to confront the Zegrax and show them what it meant to be human. What it meant to stand up for what was right, no matter the odds. Even if it meant making an enemy of every damn alien in this school. Walter and Raisin found themselves spending more time together over the following weeks, bonding over their mutual love for science and engineering. They would often hole up in the library for hours, poring over advanced textbooks and discussing complex theories. Walter was impressed by Raisin's brilliant mind, and Raisin appreciated having a friend who truly understood him. But even as their friendship grew, the bullying against Raisin only worsened. The Zegrax, with their leader Zolt at the helm, seemed to make it their mission to torment the poor tac-tac at every opportunity. They would trip him in the cafeteria, sending his food flying. They sabotaged his experiments, ruining weeks of hard work. They even resorted to physical violence, shoving him into walls and leaving him bruised. Walter refused to stand by and watch. He confronted the Zegrax time and time again, putting himself between them and Raisin. "Back off," he would growl, his fists clenched at his sides. "Leave him alone." But his interference only seemed to anger the Zegrax further. They saw Walter as a challenge to their dominance, a human upstart who needed to be put in his place. Things came to a head one day as Walter and Raisin were walking to class. They turned a corner to find Zolt and his cronies waiting, malicious grins on their insectoid faces. Before either of them could react, Zolt had Raisin pinned against the wall, a wicked-looking knife pressed to his throat. "You're going to do our homework, Squishy," Zolt hissed, his mandibles clicking. "Or else." Walter didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself between the blade and Raisin. "Let him go, Zolt, now." Zolt's compound eyes glittered with amusement. "Or what, human? You think you can take me? Your kind are weak. You don't belong here." Walter stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not going to abandon my friend. I won't let you hurt him." Zolt let out a harsh laugh. "Then I'll just have to hurt you first." He lunged forward, the knife slashing through the air. But Walter was ready. Years of martial arts training kicked in, and he moved on instinct, grabbing Zolt's wrist and twisting. The knife clattered to the ground as Walter swept Zolt's legs out from under him, pinning the Zegrax to the floor with a knee on his chest. The other Zegrax stood frozen, mandibles agape in shock. They had never seen a human move like that. With a few muttered curses, they turned and fled, leaving their leader at Walter's mercy. Walter waited until they were gone before releasing Zolt and helping Raisin to his feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, checking his friend over for injuries. Wazen nodded, his tentacles trembling slightly. "I am unharmed, thanks to you, but Walter, this cannot continue. We must report this to the administration." Walter sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew Wazen was right. This had gone too far. It was time for the Academy to step in and put a stop to the Zagrecs' reign of terror. Together they made their way to the headmaster's office, ready to face whatever consequences came their way. But one thing was certain: Walter would always stand by Wazen's side, no matter what. Walter and Wazen walked into Headmaster Zorax's office, with their heads held high, ready to present their case against the Zagrecs bullies. Walter had a bruise forming on his cheek from the altercation with Zolt, but he wore it like a badge of honor. He had stood up for his friend, and that was all that mattered. Zorax, a tall and imposing figure with shiny black exoskeleton, looked up from his desk as they entered. His compound eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of them. "Ah, Mr. King and Mr. Wazen, to what do I owe this pleasure?" Walter stepped forward, his voice steady. "Sir, we're here to report a serious issue. Zolt and his gang have been bullying Wazen for weeks, and today they escalated to physical violence. Zolt held a knife to Wazen's throat and threatened him." Zorax leaned back in his chair, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Is that so, and I assume you have proof of this alleged incident?" Wazen nodded, holding out his datapad. "I have video footage from the security cameras in the hallway. It clearly shows Zolt attacking me and Walter coming to my defense." Zorax waved a dismissive hand. "I've already spoken with Zolt and his friends. They claim it was just a bit of roughhousing, a misunderstanding. Boys will be boys, you know." Walter's fists clenched at his sides. "Roughhousing? Sir, he had a weapon. This wasn't some playful scuffle." The headmaster fixed Walter with a cold stare. "Mr. King, I understand you're new here, but at Galactic Academy we don't take kindly to troublemakers. It seems to me that you overreacted to a harmless situation." Wazen's tentacles curled in frustration. "Harmless? I was terrified for my life." Zorax stood, towering over them. "Enough. I will not have you making baseless accusations against upstanding students. Zolt's family are respected members of the Zagrecs community, with close ties to the Academy. I suggest you drop this matter and focus on your studies. Dismissed." Walter opened his mouth to argue, but Wazen placed a tentacle on his arm, shaking his head. They left the office, defeated and fuming. As they walked back to their dorm, Wazen sighed. "I can't believe he just brushed us off like that. Zolt gets away with everything because of his family's influence." Walter's mind raced, trying to come up with a solution. "We can't let them keep doing this, Wes. There has to be a way to stop them." Over the next few days they began to investigate the Zagrecs, digging into their background and activities. What they uncovered was far worse than they had imagined. Zolt's father, a high-ranking politician, had been pressuring the Academy to overlook his son's behavior, using his influence to keep the administration in line. But that wasn't the only secret they discovered. Hidden in the depths of the Academy's underground levels, the Zagrecs were running a brutal fight club. They forced smaller, weaker students to battle each other for their twisted entertainment, placing bets on the outcomes. The losers were left battered and broken, while the Zagrecs lined their pockets with the profits. Walter and Wazen knew they needed hard evidence to expose the Zagrecs' crimes. Wazen, with his brilliant engineering skills, crafted tiny, undetectable cameras that Walter could wear to infiltrate the fight club and record the horrific events. "I should be the one to go in," Walter insisted as they prepared for the mission. "I have the combat training to defend myself if things go south." Wazen shook his head vehemently. "No, it's too dangerous. I can't let you risk yourself like that." Walter placed a hand on Wazen's shoulder, looking him in the eye. "Wes, I have to do this for you, for all the other victims. We can't let them keep getting away with this." Wazen's tentacles twisted with worry, but he knew Walter's mind was made up. "Just promise me you'll be careful. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." Walter pulled his friend into a tight hug. "I promise. We're in this together no matter what." As they geared up for the infiltration, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavy on their shoulders. But they knew they had each other's backs, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. They would see this through to the end, whatever it took. Walter's heart hammered in his chest as he slipped into the dimly lit room, the stench of sweat and blood assaulting his nostrils. He had disguised himself as a new student, eager to prove his worth in the Zgrax's underground fight club. The hidden cameras Wezen had crafted were tucked discreetly into his clothing, ready to capture the evidence they needed. The room was packed with Zgrax students, their insectoid faces twisted with cruel anticipation. In the center of the room, a makeshift fighting pit had been set up, the floor stained with the blood of previous matches. Walter watched in horror as two smaller students, a Tak-Tak and a Xyla, were shoved into the pit, their faces etched with fear. The Zgrax crowd roared as the fight began, the two students circling each other warily. The Tak-Tak, his tentacles quivering, lashed out with a desperate punch. The Xylor dodged, retaliating with a swift kick to the Tak-Tak's midsection. The smaller student crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. Walter clenched his fists, fighting the urge to intervene. He had to stay focused on the mission. His cameras captured the brutality, the faces of the Zgrax ringleaders as they placed their bets and laughed at the suffering of their victims. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on Walter's shoulder, spinning him around. He found himself face to face with Zarv, one of Zolt's lieutenants. The Zgrax's compound eyes glittered with recognition and malice. Well, what do we have here?" Zarv hissed. "A human spy in our midst." Before Walter could react, Zarv had dragged him to the center of the room, throwing him at Zolt's feet. The Zgrax leader towered over him, his mandibles clicking with rage. "You dare to infiltrate our domain, human," Zolt snarled. "I'll make an example of you. I challenge you to a fight right here, right now. Let's see how tough you really are." The crowd erupted in jeers and taunts, their voices blending into a cacophony of cruelty. Walter stood slowly, meeting Zolt's gaze. He knew he couldn't back down, not without compromising everything they had worked for. "I accept your challenge," Walter said, his voice steady. The fight began in a blur of motion, Zolt launching himself at Walter with blinding speed. Walter barely managed to dodge the first strike, the Zgrax's claws whistling past his face. He countered with a punch of his own, but Zolt was too fast, too strong. Blow after blow rained down on Walter, driving him back. He tasted blood, felt the sting of cuts on his face and arms. The Zgrax crowd cheered, reveling in his pain. Walter's vision blurred, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. Zolt loomed over him, ready to deliver the final crushing blow. This was it, Walter thought. He had failed. Suddenly the doors burst open, and a familiar figure charged into the room. Wezen, his tentacles coiled with grit, leveled a stun gun at Zolt. Blue energy crackled from the weapon, hitting the Zgrax leader square in the chest. Zolt convulsed, his body going rigid before he collapsed to the ground. Behind Wezen, a group of students surged forward, their faces a mix of fear and anger. Walter recognized some of them, the ones who had been victims of the Zgrax's cruelty. They had come to fight back, to stand up against their tormentors. In the chaos, Walter felt Wezen's tentacles wrap around his arm, pulling him to his feet. "We have to go," Wezen urged, "now while they're distracted." Together they ran, pushing through the crowd and out into the hallway. Walter's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins. They had done it. They had the evidence they needed. But the fight was not nearly finished. The Zgrax would be coming for them now, seeking revenge for this humiliation. Walter and Wezen exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the dangers ahead. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Walter and Wezen burst into the boardroom, their hearts pounding, evidence in hand. The board of directors, a diverse group of beings from across the galaxy, looked up in surprise as the two students strode to the front of the room. "We have proof," Walter announced, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Proof of the Zgrax's crimes and the corruption within the Academy." Wezen stepped forward, tentacles shaking slightly as he connected his datapad to the room's display. Images and videos flashed across the screen depicting the brutal fight clubs, the betting, and the involvement of faculty members. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the board witnessed the extent of the Zigrak's depravity. "This cannot stand," the chairperson, a willowy Etherian, declared. "We will launch an immediate investigation and bring those responsible to justice." Within hours, Zolt and his gang were apprehended, dragged from their dorms in restraints. Headmaster Zorax, caught red-handed accepting bribes, was stripped of his position and escorted off the premises in disgrace. The news of the Zigrak's downfall spread like wildfire through the academy. Students who had suffered under their reign of terror emerged from the shadows, sharing their stories and thanking Walter and Wezen for their bravery. "You two are heroes," a shy tuk-tuk girl told them, her tentacles quivering with emotion. "You stood up for us when no one else would." Walter and Wezen exchanged a glance, a mix of pride and humility washing over them. They had set out to make a difference, to fight for what was right, and they had succeeded. But their victory was short-lived. Whispers began to circulate of a new threat, a group of Zigrak's extremists seeking revenge for their fallen comrades. Led by Zolt's father, a powerful government official, they plotted to attack the academy and make Walter and Wezen pay for their actions. As fear gripped the campus, the new headmaster, an ancient and wise being named Zephyr, summoned Walter and Wezen to his office. They entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Zephyr greeted them with a warm smile, his ethereal eyes shimmering with knowledge beyond their years. "Walter King and Wezen," he began, his voice a soothing melody. "I have watched your journey with great interest. You have shown courage, compassion, and a commitment to justice that is rare in beings so young." Walter and Wezen exchanged a surprised glance, uncertain how to respond. "I believe that you two have the potential to become great leaders and heroes," Zephyr continued. "But the road ahead will be fraught with danger. The Zigrak's extremists will stop at nothing to exact their revenge." "We're not afraid," Walter said, his fists clenched at his sides. "We'll face whatever comes our way." Zephyr nodded, a knowing smile on his lips. "I have no doubt of that. But you will need more than bravery to succeed. You will need skills, knowledge, and wisdom." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I would like to offer you both the opportunity to train under my guidance. I will teach you advanced combat techniques, diplomacy, and the ways of the universe. With these tools, you will be better equipped to face the challenges ahead." Walter and Wezen looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They knew that accepting Zephyr's offer would mean putting themselves in even greater danger, but they also knew that they had a responsibility, a duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "We accept," Wezen said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. Zephyr smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "Then let us begin. The fate of the Academy and perhaps the galaxy itself rests on your shoulders." As they left Zephyr's office, Walter and Wezen knew that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just students, but warriors, protectors, and leaders, and they would face whatever challenges came their way, together, as they always had. Walter and Wezen threw themselves into their training with Headmaster Zephyr, pushing their bodies and minds to the limit. They sparred for hours in the Academy's advanced combat simulators, learning to anticipate each other's moves and work as a seamless unit. Zephyr guided them through intense meditation sessions, teaching them to find inner peace, even in the midst of chaos. As they honed their physical skills, Walter and Wezen also worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps between the Academy's diverse student body. They organized interspecies events and discussion groups, encouraging their fellow students to share their unique perspectives and experiences. Slowly but surely, the walls of mistrust and prejudice began to crumble. In the cafeteria, a tuk-tuk and a Zigrak sat side by side, laughing over a shared joke. In the library, a Xylor and a human pored over ancient texts together, marveling at the wisdom of long-forgotten civilizations. The Academy was becoming a true melting pot, a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. But even as the students grew closer, the spectre of Zarlok's impending attack loomed large. Walter and Wazen spent long nights poring over intelligence reports, trying to anticipate the Zegrax's next move. They knew that Zarlok was a master manipulator, and that he would stop at nothing to see the Academy fall. Reports began to trickle in of Zegrax mercenaries, gathering on the fringes of civilized space, their ships overflowing with illegal weapons. Pirate clans, long thought to be nothing more than a distant threat, suddenly seemed to be everywhere, raiding trade routes and harassing civilian vessels. It was clear that Zarlok was calling in every favor, every debt to amass his forces. But the most insidious threat came from within. Whispers began to circulate of old grudges resurfacing, of long-standing rivalries between alien species flaring up once again. A fight broke out in the dining hall between a group of Etherian and Zegrax students, leaving several injured and the campus on edge. Walter and Wazen worked frantically to quell the rising tensions, but it seemed that every time they put out one fire, another would spring up in its place. They knew that Zarlok was behind the discord, that he was using every trick in his arsenal to weaken the Academy from the inside out. Late one night, as Walter and Wazen pored over yet another batch of troubling reports, a soft knock sounded at their door. They exchanged a wary glance, hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But when they opened the door, they found themselves face to face with a human girl, her eyes wide and her breath coming in short gasps. "My name is Arya," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I need your help, the Zegrax. They're planning something big, something that could change the course of the galaxy forever." Walter and Wazen ushered her inside, their minds racing with questions. Arya explained that she was a member of the Galactic Rangers, a secret organization dedicated to maintaining peace and justice throughout the universe. She had been working undercover, infiltrating Zegrax networks and gathering intelligence on their plans. What she had discovered was chilling. The attack on the Academy was just the beginning, a mere prelude to a much larger campaign of conquest and domination. Zarlok and his allies had their sights set on the entire galaxy, and they would stop at nothing to see their vision realized. Arya looked at Walter and Wazen, her eyes pleading. "I can't do this alone," she said. "I need your help. The Galactic Rangers need your help. We have to stop the Zegrax before it's too late." Walter and Wazen exchanged a long look, a silent conversation passing between them. They knew that what Arya was asking of them was no small thing. It would mean putting their lives on the line, risking everything they had worked so hard to build. But they also knew that they couldn't stand by and watch as the galaxy fell into darkness. "We're in," Walter said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes." Arya nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you both. We have a lot of work to do." As the three of them began to plan their next move, Walter and Wazen felt a new sense of purpose settling over them. They had started this journey as two outcasts, two misfits, who had found solace in each other's friendship. But now they were something more. They were warriors, leaders, heroes in the making. And they would face whatever challenges came their way together, as they always had. For the sake of the Academy, for the sake of the galaxy itself, they would fight, and they would win. Walter, Wazen, and Arya huddled around the holographic display in the Academy's command center, their faces grim as they studied the intelligence reports streaming in from across the galaxy. The Galactic Rangers had been working tirelessly to gather information on Zarlok's forces, and the picture that emerged was dire. "He's amassing an army," Arya said, her voice tight with tension. "Mercenaries, pirates, even some rogue military units. They're all flocking to his banner." Walter shook his head. "It doesn't make sense. Why would they follow him? What's he offering them?" Wazen's tentacles twisted nervously. "Power," he said softly. "The chance to put the rest of us in our place." Arya nodded. "And there's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting that Zarlok has acquired a new weapon, something called the Cerebral Subjugator." The hologram shifted, displaying a schematic of a strange spherical device. It pulsed with an eerie, sickly light. Walter leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What does it do?" From what we can gather, it's some kind of mind control device, Arya explained. It can turn anyone, even the most loyal soldier, into a mindless slave, completely obedient to whoever wields it. A chill ran down Walter's spine. He exchanged a look with Wazen, seeing his own fear reflected in his friend's eyes. "We have to stop him," Walter said, his voice hardening with tenacity. "If Zarlok gets his hands on that thing, he could turn the entire academy against us. We wouldn't stand a chance." Arya nodded grimly. "Agreed, that's why we need to take it out before he can use it, and I have a plan." She tapped a few commands into the console, and the hologram zoomed in on a heavily fortified structure nestled in the heart of a dense jungle. "This is Zarlok's stronghold. Our intel suggests that the cerebral subjugator is being held here, in a secure vault deep within the facility." Walter studied the hologram, taking in the layers of defenses and the swarms of Zigrax guards patrolling the perimeter. "It won't be easy getting in there." "No, it won't," Arya agreed. "But we have to try. I'll assemble a team of our best rangers to infiltrate the stronghold and destroy the device." Weazen straightened, his tentacles coiling with dedication. "We're going with you." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This isn't going to be a walk in the park." Walter met her gaze, his eyes sharpening. "We're sure this is our fight too, and we're not going to sit back and let others risk their lives for us." Arya held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. Suit up and meet me in the hangar in 30 minutes. We've got a mind control device to destroy." As Walter and Wezen hurried to gather their gear, they could feel the weight of the task ahead settling on their shoulders. They knew that infiltrating Zarlok's stronghold would be the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken, but they also knew that they had no choice. The fate of the Academy, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on their success, and they would not fail, not while they had each other. The jungle was a seething mass of green, the air thick with the hum of insects and the distant cries of alien birds. Walter crouched low in the undergrowth, his pulse rifle clutched tight to his chest. Beside him, Wezen's tentacles twitched with nervous energy, his own weapon at the ready. They had been trekking through the dense foliage for hours, following the winding path that Arya had mapped out for them. The Galactic Ranger team moved with silent efficiency, their camouflage armor blending seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation. Suddenly Arya raised a fist, signaling for the group to halt. She pointed ahead, to where the jungle thinned out into a clearing. There, rising from the tangled vines and twisted trees, was Zarlok's stronghold. It was a massive structure of black metal and gleaming glass, overflowing with gun turrets and patrolled by heavily armed Zigrax guards. A shimmering force field encased the entire compound, its surface rippling with energy. Walter felt a surge of trepidation as he took in the formidable defenses. How were they ever going to get inside? But Arya seemed unfazed. She motioned for the team to gather around her, then began outlining the plan. "We'll split into 2 teams," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Team 1 will create a diversion, drawing the guards away from the main entrance. Team 2 will use that window to slip inside and make their way to the vault." She turned to Walter and Wezen. "You 2 will be with me on Team 2. We'll have to be fast and quiet. Once we're inside, we'll only have a limited amount of time before they realize something's wrong." Walter nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Understood." Arya checked her chronometer. "All right, everyone, synchronize your timers. We go in 5. The seconds ticked down with agonizing slowness. Walter's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Beside him, Wezen was a coiled spring of tension, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. Then, with a flurry of hand signals, Arya gave the command. Team 1 burst from the undergrowth, their weapons blazing as they charged towards the stronghold's perimeter. The Zigrax guards, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to respond. In the chaos, Walter, Wezen, and Arya darted forward, hugging the shadows as they raced towards the main entrance. They reached the force field just as a gap appeared, the energy barrier flickering as the guards diverted power to the defenses. They slipped through the opening, their boots pounding on the polished metal floor as they sprinted down the corridors. Alarms blared and lights flashed, but they paid them no heed. They had a mission to complete. Arya led them deeper into the heart of the stronghold, her movements quick and precise. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, as if she had memorized the layout of the entire facility. But as they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a squad of Zigrak soldiers. The insectoid warriors let out a hissing battle cry, their plasma rifles leveled at the intruders. Walter and Wezen reacted instantly, diving for cover as a hail of energy bolts sizzled through the air. They returned fire, their own weapons spitting deadly bursts of light. The corridor erupted into a maelstrom of smoke and flame, the walls shuddering with the force of the explosions. Walter gritted his teeth as a bolt of plasma seared past his cheek, close enough to blister his skin. Beside him, Wezen let out a cry of pain as a shot grazed his shoulder, but the tak-tak didn't falter, his tentacles lashing out to send a Zigrak soldier flying. Arya was a blur of motion, her blades flashing as she closed with the enemy. She moved with a deadly grace, her strikes precise and lethal. In moments, the Zigrak squad lay dead at her feet. But there was no time to catch their breath. More soldiers were on the way, drawn by the sound of combat. They had to keep moving. They raced onwards, deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the stronghold. Every turn brought new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. Automated defense turrets, electrified floors, even a pack of snarling, genetically engineered beasts. But Walter, Wezen, and Arya met each challenge head-on, their training and their unwavering trust in one another carrying them through. They worked seamlessly as a team, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's backs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fighting and running, they reached the vault. It was a massive circular door of reinforced titanium, its surface etched with strange alien glyphs. Arya stepped forward, her fingers flying over the control panel set into the wall beside the door. "Cover me," she said, her voice strained with concentration. "This may take a moment." Walter and Wezen took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the corridor behind them. They could hear the pounding of booted feet, the angry shouts of Zigrak's soldiers. They were coming. Suddenly, the door to the vault hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. Arya motioned for them to follow, and they hurried inside. The chamber was dominated by a massive, pulsing machine, its surface studded with glowing diodes, and humming with barely contained power. The cerebral subjugator. But as they approached the device, a figure stepped out from behind it. A figure clad in black armor, his insectoid face twisted into a sneer of triumph. "Zarlok." The Zagrak's leader laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "You fools," he hissed. "Did you really think you could stop me? The cerebral subjugator is mine, and with it, I will enslave the minds of every living being in the galaxy." Walter raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger, but Zarlok just laughed again. "Go ahead, human, shoot me, but know that if you do, you'll be dooming not just the Academy, but the entire universe." He gestured to the cerebral subjugator. "This device is just the beginning, a tool to pave the way for my true master." Arya's eyes narrowed. "Your master?" Zarlok's mandibles twitched in a grotesque smile. "The Void Lord, an entity of pure darkness, a being that hungers for the life force of every soul in existence. With the cerebral subjugator, I will create an army of mindless thralls to serve him, and together we will consume the galaxy." Walter felt a chill run through him at the Zigrak's words. The stakes, it seemed, were even higher than they had realized. Wezen stepped forward, his tentacles coiled with commitment. "We won't let that happen. We'll stop you and the Void Lord no matter what it takes." Zarlok's eyes glittered with malice. "You will try, Tak-Tak, and you will fail. The Void Lord's victory is inevitable." With a roar of fury, he charged forward, his plasma blade igniting in a blaze of searing light. Walter and Wezen met him head-on, their own weapons flashing. The battle was joined, a desperate struggle for the future of the stars. and as the three warriors clashed in the heart of the enemy stronghold, each knew that there could be no turning back. They would fight until the bitter end, for the academy, for their friends, and for the future of all life itself. The air crackled with energy as Walter, Wezen, and Arya faced off against Zarlok, the cerebral subjugator pulsing behind him. The Zegrak's leader sneered, his eyes glowing with an unnatural, malevolent light. "You're too late," he hissed. "The Void Lord's power flows through me now. You cannot hope to defeat me." Walter gripped his weapon tighter, his fist clenched. "We'll see about that," he growled. They charged forward, a blur of motion and flashing blades. Zarlok met them head-on, his movements unnaturally swift and precise. He parried Walter's strike with ease, sending him stumbling back with a vicious counterattack. Arya leapt into the fray, her energy whip crackling as it lashed out at Zarlok. The Zegrak's leader dodged, his form blurring as he moved with impossible speed. He retaliated with a blast of dark energy that sent Arya flying, her body slamming into the far wall. Wezen surged forward, his tentacles coiling around Zarlok's legs in an attempt to trip him up. But Zarlok just laughed, his voice echoing with cruel amusement. He seized Wezen with one clawed hand, lifting him effortlessly into the air. "Pathetic," Zarlok spat. "Did you really think you could challenge me? I am invincible." He hurled Wezen across the room, the Tak-Tak's body crashing into a bank of machinery. Sparks flew and Wezen lay still, his tentacles twitching feebly. Walter saw red. With a roar of fury, he launched himself at Zarlok, his blade flashing in a wild frenzy. Zarlok met him blow for blow, their weapons clashing in a storm of sparks and scraping metal. But even as he fought, Walter could feel his strength waning. Zarlok was too fast, too strong. It was like fighting a force of nature, an unstoppable storm of darkness and rage. Suddenly Arya was there, her whip wrapping around Zarlok's sword arm. She yanked hard and the Zegrak's leader stumbled, his guard dropping for just a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Walter needed. With a final desperate lunge, he drove his blade deep into Zarlok's chest, piercing the black carapace and the twisted heart beneath. Zarlok staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He clawed at the wound, dark ichor oozing between his fingers. "Impossible," he gurgled. "I am invincible." But even as he spoke, his body began to crumble, dissolving into a cloud of black ash. In moments there was nothing left of the mighty Zegrak's leader but a pile of dark dust on the floor. Walter didn't spare him a second glance. He was already rushing to Wesen's side, his heart in his throat. The Tak-Tak lay motionless, his body broken and twisted. "No, no, no," Walter muttered, cradling Wesen's head in his lap. "Stay with me, Wes. Don't you dare die on me." Arya knelt beside them, her face grim as she checked Wesen's vitals. "He's alive, but barely. We need to get him back to the academy now." Walter nodded, gathering Wezen into his arms. The Tak-Tak was heavier than he looked, his tentacles dragging limply on the ground. But Walter didn't care. He would carry his friend to the ends of the universe if he had to. Together they raced back through the collapsing stronghold, dodging falling debris and sparking wires. The place was coming down around their ears, the Void Lord's dark energy dissipating with Zarlok's defeat. They burst out into the open air just as the final supports gave way, the fortress imploding in on itself with a deafening roar. Walter staggered, nearly losing his footing, but Arya was there to steady him. "Come on," she urged. "We're not out of the woods yet." They made it back to their shuttle, Arya taking the controls as Walter laid Wezen gently on a medical cot. He worked frantically to stabilize his friend, his hands shaking as he applied pressure bandages and hooked up IV lines. "Stay with me, Wes," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I need you, we all do." The journey back to the academy seemed to take an eternity, every second stretching out into a small forever. Walter never left Wezen's side, monitoring his vitals and murmuring desperate pleas for him to hold on. When they finally touched down at the academy's medical bay, a team of healers was already waiting, alerted by Arya's urgent communique. They rushed Wezen away on a hover gurney, leaving Walter to collapse into a chair in the waiting room, his head in his hands. Hours crawled by, marked only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and the hushed murmurs of the healers. Walter paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of fear and desperate hope. Finally, after an interminable wait, one of the healers emerged, her face grave. "Your friend is stable for now," she said, "but his injuries are severe. We've done all we can, but I cannot say for certain if he will recover. The next few days will be critical." Walter nodded, numb. He followed the healer back to Wazen's room, his heart clenching at the sight of his friend lying so still and pale on the bed, his body swathed in bandages and hooked up to a dozen different machines. He sank into the chair beside the bed, taking Wazen's limp tentacle in his hand. "I'm here, Wes," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. You're going to beat this, you hear me? You're going to wake up, and we're going to finish what we started, together." But even as he spoke the words, a cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach, because he knew that their fight was far from finished. News had reached the Academy of the Zegrax attack, of the Void Lord's growing influence across the galaxy. Even now the Academy's defenses were being tested, its students and faculty standing strong against the onslaught. But for how long? How long could they hold out against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment? Walter closed his eyes, torn. He wanted nothing more than to stay by Wazen's side, to be there when his friend opened his eyes. But he knew that he had a duty, a responsibility to the Academy and to the galaxy as a whole. He thought of Arya, of the Galactic Rangers who even now were fighting and dying to hold back the tide of darkness. He thought of the countless innocent lives at stake, the trillions of souls who would suffer if the Void Lord was allowed to prevail. And he knew what he had to do. With a final gentle squeeze of Wazen's tentacle, Walter stood. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against his friend's. "I'll be back, Wes," he promised. "I swear it. But there's something I have to do first. Something only I can do." He straightened, squaring his shoulders. His eyes were hard, filled with a grim tenacity. He knew the path ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but he also knew that he had no choice. For the sake of his friend, for the sake of the Academy, for the sake of every living being in the galaxy. He would take the fight to the Void Lord, and he would end this once and for all. The Void was a hellscape of twisted, impossible geometries and sickening colors that defied description. Walter felt his legs shaking, his sanity straining at its tethers as he tried to make sense of the non-Euclidean landscape. Beside him, Arya and the Galactic Rangers looked equally strained, their faces pale and their eyes haunted. They pressed on, picking their way through the shifting, treacherous terrain. Strange, gibbering creatures lurked in the shadows, their forms indistinct and ever-changing. Walter caught glimpses of too many eyes, too many teeth, limbs bent at impossible angles. A sound like the screaming of 1,000 tortured souls filled the air, and suddenly they were under attack. Nightmarish abominations swarmed out of the darkness, all claws and fangs and pulsing, pustulant flesh. Walter's training kicked in, and he moved on instinct, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing energy into the horde. Beside him, Arya's whip crackled and flared, slicing through the monsters like a hot knife through rancid butter. The Rangers fought with grim efficiency, their weapons blazing, but for every creature they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were being overwhelmed, slowly but surely. Suddenly a figure strode out of the chaos, tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned like cold stars, one of the Void Lord's elite guardians, a being of pure darkness and malice. It raised a hand, and a wave of force slammed into the team, sending them flying. Walter hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. He struggled to rise, his body aching, his vision swimming. The Guardian loomed over him, its voice a whisper of razors in his mind. "Surrender, human," it hissed. "Embrace the darkness, and your friend will be spared." An image of Wazen filled Walter's thoughts, broken and bleeding, his life hanging by a thread. The temptation was overwhelming, the desire to save his friend, to spare his home, almost too much to bear. But then he remembered Zephyr's words, spoken in a moment of quiet wisdom. It is in our darkest moments that we must hold fast to who we are, to the ideals that define us. Walter gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet. "No," he growled. "I won't betray everything I believe in, not even for Weezon. He would never want that." The Guardian snarled, its form swelling with rage. "Then die, fool!" It lunged, a blade of pure shadow forming in its hand. Walter met its charge head-on, his rifle forgotten, his own hands wreathed in crackling blue-white energy, a manifestation of his indomitable human spirit. They clashed in a blinding flash of light and darkness, a battle not just of physical strength but of will and conviction. Walter poured everything he had into the struggle, every ounce of his love for Weezon, his loyalty to the Academy, his belief in the fundamental goodness of the universe. And slowly, incredibly, he began to gain ground, to push the Guardian back. The creature's form started to fray at the edges, its darkness unraveling in the face of Walter's unyielding dedication. With a final desperate surge of effort, Walter shattered the Guardian's blade and seized it by the throat. The creature writhed in his grasp, its eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "This ends now," Walter declared, his voice ringing with authority. "Your master's reign of terror is over." He tightened his grip, and the Guardian dissolved, its essence dispersing into the void. Around him the other creatures began to retreat, melting back into the shadows in the face of his victory. Arya and the Rangers regrouped, battered but unbroken. They exchanged looks of weary triumph, knowing that this was just the first of many battles to come. But as they stood there, united in their purpose, Walter felt a flicker of hope kindle in his heart. They could do this. They could defeat the Void Lord, save Weezon, and protect the galaxy. It wouldn't be easy. It might cost them everything. But they would face it together, as friends, as comrades, as champions of the light. The Void Lord's fortress loomed ahead, a spire of darkness that seemed to swallow the very fabric of reality. Walter took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. It was time to end this once and for all. As they approached the towering gates of the fortress, a sense of unease settled over the group like a suffocating shroud. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood, the very atmosphere seeming to pulse with malevolent energy. The gates swung open with a grating, ominous creak, revealing a cavernous entrance hall that stretched into the darkness beyond. Twisted, grotesque statues lined the walls, their forms a nightmarish blend of flesh and metal, agony etched into their contorted faces. Walter and Arya exchanged a grim look, their weapons held at the ready. The Galactic Rangers fanned out behind them, their expressions hard and determined. They knew that this was the heart of the Void Lord's power, the nexus of its evil influence. As they stepped across the threshold, a sudden, overwhelming presence slammed into their minds, a voice that was both seductive and terrifying, ancient and timeless. "Welcome, Walter King," it purred, the sound like 1,000 razors scraping against bone. "I have been waiting for you." Walter felt his blood run cold, his heart hammering in his chest. This was the Void Lord itself, the embodiment of darkness and despair. He forced himself to stand tall, to meet the entity's unseen gaze. "I'm here to stop you," he declared, his voice ringing with a courage he didn't quite feel. "Your reign of terror ends now." The Void Lord laughed, the sound echoing through the fortress like the tolling of a funeral bell. "You are brave, human, I will grant you that. But you are also foolish. You cannot hope to defeat me." The air shimmered, and suddenly a figure appeared before them, tall and regal, with skin as black as the void itself, and eyes that gleamed with a cold, predatory intelligence, the Void Lord in physical form. It stalked forward, its movements fluid and graceful, almost hypnotic. "You have potential, Walter," it murmured, its voice a silken caress. "I can feel the power within you, the untapped strength of your human spirit. Join me, and together we can reshape the galaxy in our image." Images flooded Walter's mind, visions of himself at the Void Lord's side wielding unimaginable power. He saw Wesen, healthy and strong, standing beside him. He saw Earth, untouched by the ravages of war, its people prospering under his benevolent rule. The temptation was staggering, the promise of everything he had ever wanted, ever dreamed of. He felt his willpower wavering, his grip on his principles slipping. But then Arya was there, her hand on his shoulder, her voice cutting through the haze of the Void Lord's influence. "Walter, don't listen to it," she urged, her tone fierce and unyielding. "This isn't you. You're better than this." Her words were like a splash of cold water, jolting him back to reality. He thought of Wesen, of the friendship they had forged, the bond that had carried them through so much. He thought of the academy, of the ideals it represented, unity, compassion, the strength of diversity. He knew in that moment that he could never betray those ideals, whatever it takes, that to do so would be to lose himself, to become something he despised. Walter met the Void Lord's gaze, his eyes hard and unflinching. "No," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I will never join you. I will never abandon my friends, my principles, my humanity." The Void Lord's face contorted with rage, its form seeming to swell and darken. "Then you will die," it hissed, "and everything you love will perish with you." It lashed out, a wave of pure destructive energy surging towards them. But Walter was ready, his own power rising to meet it. He reached deep within himself, tapping into the core of his being, the unbreakable spirit that defined him as human. He felt Arya beside him, her strength joining with his, and the galactic rangers at his back, united in their defiance. Together they met the Void Lord's attack head-on, their combined might clashing with the entities, in a blinding flash of light and shadow. The fortress shook with the force of their struggle, cracks spreading through the walls, the very foundations of the Void Lord's power beginning to crumble. And in that moment, Walter knew that they could win, that the bonds of friendship and the indomitable human will were more powerful than any darkness, any evil. They would fight and they would triumph, no matter the odds. For the fate of the stars, for the future of all life, they would prevail. The battle raged on, a cataclysmic clash of cosmic forces that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality asunder. The Void Lord, in its physical form, was a terror to behold, its movements a blur of shadow and malice, its attacks devastating in their intensity. But Walter and his allies met it blow for blow, their own powers fueled by the unbreakable bonds between them. Arya was a whirlwind of motion, her energy whip slicing through the air, leaving trails of searing light in its wake. The Galactic Rangers fought with the precision and skill of seasoned warriors, their weapons flaring with each perfectly aimed shot. And at the center of it all was Walter, his form wreathed in an aura of shimmering blue-white energy, the manifestation of his human spirit. He moved with a fluid grace, his strikes precise and powerful, guided by the memories of his training with Zephyr and the unwavering belief in the righteousness of his cause. The Void Lord's fortress shuddered and groaned around them, the very stone seeming to warp and twist under the onslaught of their battle. Chunks of masonry fell from the ceiling, crashing to the ground in showers of dust and debris. The entity itself was showing signs of strain, its form flickering and distorting, its attacks becoming increasingly erratic. It lashed out with tendrils of pure darkness, seeking to ensnare and crush its opponents, but each time Walter and his team managed to evade or counter, their coordination flawless. In a moment of desperation, the Void Lord summoned a swarm of its nightmarish minions, the creatures pouring into the chamber like a tide of living darkness. They swarmed over the Galactic Rangers, threatening to overwhelm them by sheer numbers. But Arya was there, her whip spinning in a dazzling arc, cutting through the horde like a scythe through wheat. The Rangers rallied around her, their weapons blazing, each shot finding its mark with unerring accuracy. Walter, meanwhile, pressed his advantage against the Void Lord itself, his fists pounding against its dark form, each blow infused with the power of his unyielding resolve. The entity reeled under his assault, its defenses crumbling, its once confident facade cracking. In a final daring plan, it reached out with its mind, seeking to worm its way into Walter's thoughts, to twist and corrupt him from within. He felt its insidious presence, cold and slimy, slithering through his psyche. But he was ready for it, his mental defenses fortified by the teachings of Zephyr and the strength of his convictions. He met the Void Lord's psychic assault head-on, his will clashing with its in a battle that was every bit as fierce as the physical confrontation. Images flashed through his mind, visions of Vaesen broken and dying, of Earth consumed by the Void Lord's darkness, of the Academy reduced to rubble and ash. But he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the memories of friendship, of laughter and triumph shared with those he loved. And with a final mighty effort of will, he expelled the Void Lord from his mind, shattering its psychic hold. The entity recoiled, its form spasming, a high-pitched, unearthly shriek tearing from its throat. In that moment of vulnerability, Walter saw his chance. He gathered every last ounce of his power, every shred of his willpower and love and indomitable human spirit, and channeled it into a single, devastating blow. His fist slammed into the Void Lord's chest, a shockwave of pure, radiant energy erupting from the point of impact. The entity convulsed, its form starting to unravel, darkness peeling away in strips to reveal a core of blinding, searing light. "No!" it howled, its voice a discordant cacophony of rage and disbelief. "This cannot be. I am eternal. I am invincible." But even as it spoke, its form was dissipating, its essence unraveling like a tapestry cut from its loom. The darkness that had defined it, that had threatened to engulf the galaxy, was being consumed by the light, burned away like mist before the rising sun. With a final, anguished cry, the Void Lord shattered, its shards scattering to the cosmic winds, its power broken forever. The fortress, no longer sustained by its dark presence, began to collapse in earnest, huge sections of the walls and ceiling crumbling, the floor heaving and buckling. "We have to get out of here," Arya shouted over the chaos, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and urgency. Walter nodded, his own body aching with the toll of the battle. He turned to the Galactic Rangers, his eyes shining with gratitude and respect. "Thank you," he said, his words heartfelt. "I couldn't have done this without you." The Rangers saluted, their faces etched with a mix of weariness and pride. "It was an honor, sir," their leader said, his voice gruff but sincere. Together they raced through the crumbling fortress, dodging falling debris and leaping over widening chasms. The twisted geometries of the Void Lord's realm were unraveling around them, the fabric of reality reasserting itself in the wake of the entity's demise. They burst out into the open, the sickly pulsing sky of the dark dimension, giving way to the familiar starscape of normal space. Their ship, battered but intact, was waiting for them, a beacon of hope and safety. As they stumbled aboard, exhausted but victorious, Walter felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had defeated the Void Lord, had saved the galaxy from an unspeakable fate. But even as he collapsed into his seat, his thoughts were already turning to Vaesen, to the friend he had left behind. He knew that their journey was not nearly finished, that there would be challenges and trials ahead. But he also knew that they would face them together, united by the bonds of friendship and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. They had proven that there was no darkness too deep, no evil too powerful, that could stand against the light of hope and the strength of the soul. And with that knowledge, that unshakable conviction, they set course for home, ready to face whatever the future might bring. In the heart of the Void Lord's crumbling realm, Walter, Arya, and the Galactic Rangers stood their ground, weapons blazing as they faced the onslaught of the entity's minions. The air crackled with dark energy, the twisted landscape pulsing with malevolent intent. Walter ducked and weaved, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing light into the horde of nightmarish creatures. Beside him, Arya's energy whip lashed out, slicing through the ranks of the Void Lord's servants with deadly precision. The Galactic Rangers fought with dogged tenacity, their weapons flaring as they cut down the enemy forces. But for every minion they felled, 2 more seemed to take its place, an endless tide of darkness and despair. Suddenly a blast of pure, malevolent power ripped through the battlefield, sending Walter and his allies tumbling. The Void Lord loomed over them, its form a towering mass of shadow and malice. "Foolish mortals," it hissed, its voice a sibilant whisper that cut through the chaos of battle. "You cannot hope to defeat me. I am eternal. I am infinite." Walter struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He raised his weapon, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We'll see about that," he growled. He charged forward, pouring every ounce of his strength and training into his attacks. His plasma rifle flared, searing bolts of energy slamming into the Void Lord's form. The entity recoiled, its shadowy form rippling with each impact. Arya and the Rangers pressed their advantage, their weapons adding to the onslaught. The Void Lord's minions fell back, scattering before the fury of the hero's assault. For a moment it seemed as though victory was within reach. The Void Lord staggered, its form flickering and dimming under the relentless barrage. But then the entity let out a cruel, mocking laugh. "You think you have won?" it sneered. "You have no idea of the true depths of my power." The Void Lord's eyes flared with a sickly pulsing light. "Behold the price of your defiance." An image appeared in Walter's mind, a vision of Vaesen lying broken and still on a medical bed, his life force ebbing away. With a sudden, horrifying realization, Walter understood the truth. The Void Lord had linked Vaesen's life to its own, a twisted tether of dark magic. If the entity was destroyed, Vaesen would perish as well. Walter faltered, his weapon lowering as the weight of the revelation crashed over him. In that moment of hesitation, the Void Lord struck. A blast of pure, destructive energy slammed into Walter, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming, his body racked with pain. Arya leapt to his defense, her energy whip cracking as she stood over him, shielding him from the Void Lord's wrath. But even her incredible skills were no match for the entity's power. A bolt of darkness struck Arya square in the chest, piercing her armor and sending her crumpling to the ground. Walter scrambled to her side, cradling her broken form in his arms. "Arya, no," he whispered, his voice cracking with despair. "Stay with me, please." Arya's eyes fluttered open, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. "Walter," she murmured, her hand reaching up to touch his cheek. Remember what we've learned." Her words cut through the haze of grief and pain, echoing the lessons they had learned together. The power of sacrifice, the strength of friendship, the unbreakable bonds that tied them together. Walter closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He knew what he had to do, even as the knowledge tore at his heart. Gently he laid Arya down, his hand brushing her forehead in a final tender gesture. Then he stood facing the Void Lord once more. The entity regarded him with a mix of amusement and contempt. "What now, human?" it taunted. "Will you let your friend die to save this pathetic galaxy, or will you surrender to me and spare his life?" Walter's grip tightened on his weapon, his eyes hardening with determination. "Neither," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I choose a third option." With a roar of defiance, he charged forward, pouring every last ounce of his strength, his love, his unbreakable human spirit into a single devastating blow. His fist slammed into the Void Lord's chest, a shockwave of pure, radiant energy exploding outwards from the point of impact. The entity screamed, its form convulsing, cracks of light spreading across its shadowy surface. Walter poured everything he had into the attack, his body glowing with a blinding, searing light. He felt the Void Lord's essence unraveling, its power dissipating like mist before the rising sun. With a final, anguished howl, the Void Lord shattered, its form exploding into a million shards of darkness. The realm around them began to collapse, the twisted landscape crumbling and dissolving. Exhausted and battered, Walter staggered to Arya's side, gathering her limp form into his arms. With the last of his strength, he activated his emergency beacon, signaling for extraction. As the Galactic Ranger ship descended from the sky, Walter's thoughts turned to Wezen, to the friend he had sacrificed everything to save. The pain of loss tore at his heart, a wound that he knew would never fully heal. But even in the depths of his grief, he knew that he had made the right choice. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of all the lives that hung in the balance, he had done what needed to be done. As the ship carried them away from the collapsing realm, Walter held Arya close, his tears falling silently onto her still face. The price of victory had been high, but he knew that his friend's bravery and love would live on, a shining beacon of hope in the vast darkness of space. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.